This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Hello, world, and welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. Today's sponsor is A2 Hosting. I've been using A2 Hosting solid state hosting solutions for our website at geekleader.com for many years now, and absolutely love their support, their service, and all the features that you get. You get access to cPanel. You get all of the things that you can imagine for a great WordPress experience, including their A2 optimized WordPress, which does extra security checks, extra lockdown. You can lock down your editor file so you can't edit anything inside there. You get alerts whenever there are file changes that are done. You can also do automatic updates, backups, and more with A2 Hosting. So highly recommend it. Go to geekleader.com/A2 to get more information and to sign up for their solid state turbocharged speed hosting today. Again, that's at geekleader.com/A2. All right, Geek Leaders. Today on the show, I'm honored to have Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup. He is a Chief Technology Evangelist with Druva. He's also the host of the Restored All podcast from backupcentral.com. And we're going to talk a lot about backups, disaster recovery, the importance of all this stuff, and what all of us IT leaders need to know about and pay attention to when it comes to backups. With all that being said, Curtis, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
If you mind, just tell the audience a little bit about how you got to where you are in your career and how did you become Mr. Backup?
Well, you know, if I'm being honest, it was initially by complete accident, really. You know, it started out as backups. Like a lot of people, backups was the job that I could get. And I got the job as being the backup guy at happened to be a major bank. And honestly, I had very little qualifications for that job, but nobody else wants that job. So I managed to get that job. And then after, a few years, I went into consulting to quote unquote, get out of backups and to become a real sysadmin. But I kept getting put in places where my backup expertise was very useful. And then within a couple of years, I realized, I have this knowledge that nobody else seems to have. And so amazingly, I made a blog in the late 90s, which we didn't call it a blog back then, but I made a website with a blog on it. And then I decided to write a book. Amazingly, I don't know what sort of chutzpah, I had to do that. But, once I did that, that was pretty much it. Right after that, I wrote a few other books. I specialized consulting in backup, and I did some analyst work as it. And now in the last 4 years, I've actually, for the first time in my career, I'm actually working for a vendor. Happens to be a backup as a service vendor running in the cloud. So
yeah, and your latest book, Modern Data Protection, you talk about some of the things that I guess are relatively new when it comes to data protection and backups and things that I've seen in my personal life, being in charge of a technology team and head of technology for a company that save your butt when you get hit with ransomware or something like that. Can you talk a little bit about some of the newer things when it comes to backups and the, I guess, increased importance that we're seeing today?
Well, the thing with backups, the fundamental technology has changed in terms of how we back up over the last 30 years. Actually, in not too many months, it'll be 30 years that I'll have been doing this. And we've changed how we've done it. We used to just be tape, and then it was disk and tape, and then most people had gone to disk, and then we started bringing in cloud. But then also the fundamental sort of big batch method. That's the way we always did backup. Was backup started at, let's say, 10 p.m. and they ran all night when nobody else was using the servers. Backups just don't generally work like that. At least modern backups, they tend to work a little bit at a time throughout the day, rather than save everything to the night or to the evening.
Yeah.
But the other big difference, so I'd say the three differences, right? So that's one, we've changed how we do backups. It's very different technologically. And then the other thing is that the data center is no longer the center of data. So you have a lot more things to back up today than you had before. You could literally walk in the data center and say, back up those servers and then back up those servers. But now many companies don't even have a data center. Or if they do, a significant portion of their compute is up in the cloud. Everyone is using SaaS services. It seems like the whole world has gone to either Microsoft 365 or G Suite, and and Salesforce, and there's all of these really important business critical applications that are run as SaaS services, and you have all of this really important data that is sitting in someone else's data center, and that data needs to be backed up, but it's in a completely different place and in a completely different, like it's not, again, back in the day, we would just put an agent on that server and back it up. Well, you don't do that with a SaaS service. You've got to interact with it completely differently. So that's the other thing, is the where and what we're backing up has completely changed. And then I'd say, and finally add to that, the concept of containers and Kubernetes and things like that fundamentally changes things as well. And then finally, the thing you actually asked me about, which is about ransomware. No one 30 years ago, even no one 5 years ago, was attacking your backups. Right. Your backups used to be the last line of defense. Well, they always were the last line of defense, but they weren't also being attacked. You just had to protect them against the laws of physics and, bad luck. Now you have to protect your backups. Well, first off, backups have become much more important because of ransomware, and you have to protect the backups themselves from being attacked by ransomware. So
yeah, I remember back, the first time I heard about someone attacking a backups was, I was reading a case study that someone, I have no idea who put it together. And actually, I think I was watching it live on Twitter. And then I read the case study later about a company called CodeSpaces. I don't know if you remember CodeSpaces, maybe like 10 years ago.
CodeSpaces is one of my top 10 stories to go to.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about that story, the people that haven't heard it before.
Yeah, so CodeSpaces was a company, ironically, meant to be a SaaS service, a safe place to store your code. And so think like GitHub, but, different. And a lot of people had their code in there. And then what happened is they got attacked. It's literally the first, as far as I know it, the first, publicly known ransomware attack, because the guy, he didn't encrypt their data, but what it was is he said, I've got your admin rights. I have all power in your, because they were running in AWS, right? So, and he basically said, or she, I don't know, that they basically said, give me $1 million or whatever it was, or I'm going to delete your company. And they stalled, and they stalled, and then they tried to do some stuff to kick out the hacker, and the hacker detected what they were doing, and he just deleted their company. And because they hadn't followed sort of best practice of how you configure backups in the cloud, all of their backups, everything was all in a single AWS account, which for the record did not have multi-factor authentication turned on either. And so when he deleted that account, their entire company ceased to exist that moment. And there was no going back.
And not only that, it wasn't just their entire company, but I think there was roughly like 30 other companies that also went out because they had put all their source code into CodeSpaces. And when CodeSpaces source code was gone, these companies had no way of getting their code back to rebuild their tools.
Yeah.
It was a disaster.
Yeah, it was a multi-company disaster as well. Yeah, and again, had they simply followed sort of basic best practices, multi-factor authentication was already a thing. And if you're going to be in the cloud, I think MFA is just required anywhere. But if you're going to put your entire infrastructure in the cloud, you better have MFA. And then also that they had all their eggs in one basket. They put their production stuff and your backup in the same exact account in the same region. You just don't do that.
Yeah, it's that's one of the stories that I tell people whenever they say, "Oh, you don't need to back up Office 365. Microsoft takes care of that." I say, "Well, maybe, but
Yeah.
maybe not."
So yeah, so that one, I end up arguing that particular data point, obviously, quite a lot as well. And what I point out is I say, please point to me in your service contract where Microsoft says that they will recover your environment, if the worst happens, because it's not in there, right? And they have a lot of backup. I like Microsoft 365, right? They have a lot of backup features that look like backup, right? They have words like restore.
Yes.
But when they use the word restore, what they mean is pull out of a recycle bin, right? That's not a restore. That's just moving, right? You're just moving data from one place to another. In order for it to be a backup, it needs to be in a different place, in a different format, not subject to the same authentication systems, et cetera. And what they are doing, which is useful, doesn't meet that most basic definition of backup. And so, yes, you should be backing up 365 and G Suite and Salesforce and things like that.
Yeah, and one of the things that you hear about when you're talking about cloud backups and backing up data is that the backup needs to be an immutable backup. Can you explain what that means to people that may not be familiar with that term?
Yeah, I mean, immutable, basically just means that it can't be changed. Changed, but changed can mean a number of things, right? So, and it's one of these terms. It's unfortunately become a marketing term.
Yeah.
That can mean almost anything to anybody. So I wrote a pretty long blog post about how that immutability is actually, I see it as it's more like a spectrum than a binary condition. And I'll explain what I mean. So pregnancy is a binary condition, right? So you're either pregnant or you're not pregnant. Okay. You're either dead or you're alive. These are binary conditions. Immutability is not a binary condition. And why do I say that? So, because there are a number of things, even the truly immutable. So a truly immutable product, I would think, would be something like Worm Optical, right? Worm Optical or Worm Tape. And well, actually, I'm gonna stick with Worm Optical, because even Worm Tape, it's still done in software, so maybe some wizard could figure out how to undo that. But Worm Optical, it's a physical medium that cannot be it cannot be changed. Okay, but hand me that Worm Optical disc and also hand me a hammer, and I'll show you how immutable that disc really is. Nothing is 100% immutable. Some things are more immutable than others. Generally, what backup companies mean when they say immutable is they mean that the data will not be changed by corruption or corruption or encryption, right? So that it won't be attacked by ransomware, right? The only thing I want to point out in that scenario is there are many other risks, if not even more common risks, against your backup data than being attacked by ransomware. So generally, they mean it can't be attacked by ransomware, but think about an administrator accidentally deleting your backups. Think about someone using gaining login privileges to your backup server and deleting all your backups. Either a rogue admin, someone who's an actual admin that's ticked off and they're leaving the company and so they want to do damage on their way out, or someone who's used privilege escalation or something like that, stolen encryption. I'm sorry, stolen credentials, and then they're able to delete the backups. And there are other things besides ransomware, and so you need to look. And so some people protect against some things, but not others. That's why I'm saying it's a spectrum. So you should look at all of the various things that could happen to your backup data ransomware only being one of them, and look to see what your backup vendor is doing to protect you from yourself, from accidentally deleting backups, from a rogue admin, from data corruption over time, colloquially referred to as bit rot. And yes, definitely ransomware. There are ransomware groups like the Conti group, which is the largest, that are directly targeting backups. And what they do is they actually find a backup server, they exfiltrate the backups, and then they delete them. They don't even bother with encrypting them, right? They exfiltrate the backups and then they delete them. So what is your backup vendor doing to protect you from that, right? Immutability. Again, this is why I wanted to, I know it's a really long answer, but it's a really complicated question.
Yeah.
But when people say immutability, they just mean it can't be changed, like corrupted, but deletion is also changing, right? So if I'm a ransomware attacker, I don't need to corrupt your backups. If I can exfiltrate them and then I can delete them using file system tools, I didn't have to, I get around your so-called immutability, I guess is what I'm saying. So this is why I'm saying it's a complicated topic that you should really be talking to your backup vendor about.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you see it all the time. Oh, we have immutable backups, but I mean, I like what you're saying there, because I go back to the code spaces thing. Well, I could just delete the backups, and,
Yeah.
Exactly. Whether it's ransomware doing it or intentionally an admin doing it, it's still the same problem that you fall into.
That's a perfect story, because let's say S3. So for example, S3 has immutability, right? So if you delete your account, your immutability goes away. So for example, code spaces could have used S3 immutable objects, and they still would have been subject to this problem because the person deleted their entire account.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but it's definitely something you should be talking about with your vendor.
So one of the things that, like you mentioned, that the technology has kind of changed over time, but there's still companies out there that are using legacy, as we would call it, legacy technologies when it comes to backups. And me being in the media space, LTOs are still kind of one of the things that are used when it comes to movie backups, and when you got your raw files that a lot of large media companies are putting out there. Where is that going and changing? And is that something that you think will always be around, or is there going to be some other technology that people will move away from the LTO space?
So for a guy that works for a cloud-based data protection company, I'm pretty bullish on LTO. I think so. Yes, tape as a concept is a legacy technology. I would not refer to LTO itself as a legacy technology, because it does continue to be developed and enhanced and made better, not just faster, right? Not just faster and bigger. They've continued to add functionality, and such as LTFS. Tape is still, in terms of, if you need to put data on something and store it for a relatively long period of time and have it stay there and have it be immutable, and have it and be sure that when you need it back 10 years from now or 20 years from now, you'll get back what you put down there. Tape is, at this point, is the easiest and cheapest way to do that. Tape is more is better at writing ones and zeros than disk, right? It has a better what's called the undetectable bit error rate, and or undetected bit error rate. So it's better at actually writing the ones and zeros, and it has a much better there's a thing called coercivity, which is bit rot, which is this ones and zeros randomly flipping over time. It is 2 or 3 orders of magnitude better at that than disk is. So I'm fine with using tape for that purpose. I don't use tape for day-to-day backup and recovery, and I use it more for long-term, which is what you were talking about, long-term storage. So I have no problem with tape for that purpose. The problem that I have with tape is that backup is actually way slower than tape is. Most people think tape is too slow. It's actually the opposite problem. Tape is actually way too fast. If you look at tape, it's approaching, if not already surpassed, a gigabyte per second. I don't know any backups that can run at that speed, right? So it's a fundamental mismatch of technology. That's why I don't use tape for day-to-day operational backup. But to go to the second part of your question about, is there something that will replace it? There are a number of companies that have skunkworks projects to do things that will maybe ultimately replace tape. It will have to be something amazing, right? So for example, optical does not replace tape for two reasons. One is cost, and the other is how long it takes to write the data on an optical platter. It doesn't approach tape in either of those categories. It doesn't come anywhere near it.
Yeah. I know.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I know a lot of times tape is also used not just for backups, but also like archiving.
Yes,
and one of the discussions that I have on a regular basis is the difference between archiving and backup. And I'm hoping that someone like you, that's a professional, could talk a little bit, you maybe explain this in a better way than I can.
I have an entire chapter in the book that you referenced, Modern Data Protection, on that topic. So backup is I'm making a copy for the purpose of putting my thing back to the way it used to look, right? So I'm backing up my laptop in case my laptop catches fire. I'm backing up my phone in case I drop my phone in the ocean or some person steals it, right? Backup is to put the thing that you have back to the way it used to look yesterday. Maybe a week ago, maybe a couple of months ago, in rare cases. Way more, even more rare is to a year ago, right? But backup, that's backup. Archive is, I have this set of data that I don't want to let go of, but I don't want to keep it on my computer. And so I'm going to put it in a box, and I'm going to put it on a shelf, and then I'm going to be able to come back to it later, right? So again, you're in the media business. So I live in Southern California. I have lots of friends in the media and entertainment space. And when they finish a movie, they often archive the entire project. They may or may not archive the source data and the project files, but they will definitely archive later versions. They may or may not do the first, they may do both, but when they do that, they put all of that stuff in one sort of digital box. And that way, when it's 20 years later and they want to do the director's cut 30-year edition of Blade Runner, they can pull all that out and do cool stuff to it and then charge people more money to have it again, right? That's an archive. And it's not to restore systems to the way they look yesterday. It's to get a bunch of data. So that's one type of archive. A similar the concept of archive is if you're storing data for a different purpose. So if you're a financial trading firm and you are required by the SEC to maintain copies of all communications with customers, putting all of that. So basically you archive every email you send, every text message you send, that gets put into an archive so that it can be searched, so that when customer A says that you promised them a certain financial return, you can search on that customer and you can show that they either did or didn't. That's an archive. But a backup, there are a bunch of different types of archives, but backup is very simple. It is a copy of your data used to restore your computing device back to the way it looked at a very recent period of time.
Yeah. I know that's kind of the model that you talked about first when it comes to archiving. That's exactly how we do it in the media industry. So that was really good to hear the way you explained that. One thing that I've struggled with and had some conversations with people about is, what is your responsibility when it comes to backups and archives, following some of the new regulations like GDPR and things like that, when you have to delete data or remove data from a customer record because they've requested it. is that also responsible for to remove that from your backup?
That is a great question.
I'm not asking the easy ones today.
The answer, there has not been a definitive answer from the commission that runs GDPR. Okay. By the way, I brought this up. You can find an article from Chris Meller in the Register. I brought this up right when GDPR came out. Was, hey folks, you guys all think that we're going to delete the stuff from backups. That's not possible. In very rare cases is it possible to delete selective data out of backups. Backups by design, they are designed to remember. They're not very good at forgetting. And they're really not good at forgetting selective pieces of data. It's just, given how backups are made, it is not technically feasible in almost every case. It's just not technically feasible to surgically remove, let's say, a record from a database, because that's generally what we're talking about here, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's marketing data in your marketing database. If you've got backups of that database made in sort of the traditional way, which is the way most people are backing up databases, is it's this big bulk export, right? There's no technology, made that will allow you to go in and surgically alter that backup and take out one record out of that backup without messing up the integrity of the rest of the backup.
Right. In my opinion, that goes back to that whole immutability that we were talking about before. Don't you in turn make your backups, you remove that immutability once you have that ability to surgically do that.
Yeah, that is exactly true. There is a product called Forget Me Yes,
Mm-hmm.
from a company called Oculus Vision Tech, that what they do is they will, you can delete you can tell them that you're deleting this person out of Salesforce or wherever, and then they will delete it out of Salesforce. They'll keep enough of that information to then, when you do a restore or someone comes in and imports data that they're not supposed to import, and this person magically shows back up in Salesforce, they can notify you and then get rid of that person over time. But they're not doing it against the backup. They're doing it against your production. They're watching your production. So their tagline is, remembering those that you need to forget. So
Yeah.
That's an interesting idea, but it's a tough thing that I think backup companies, and I work for one of them, backup companies are working very hard to solve a lot of problems, because the problem is backup is such a moving target. Everything keeps changing. You think about the cloud and how much the cloud has changed. You think about the containers and all of that. That was a massive change. There's just this constant change that the backup companies have to keep up with. And asking them to fundamentally change how they do what they already support, it's a big ask.
Yeah, for sure. That what you just said kind of leads me to my next question. That you mentioned early on that you've been in the industry for a long time, doing backups, and this is your first vendor that you've actually worked for, Druva. Can you tell me what made you change your mind for that, and what is maybe Druva doing differently that interested you?
Well, there's a couple of things, right? I did want to sort of make that. I felt it was like the next phase in my career. When I looked at the various companies that were doing things, the idea of a SaaS, of applying the concepts of SaaS to data protection are really appealing to me. You look at my entire career, I've just tried to help people have reliable backups, right? And disaster recovery. And the thing is that no one wants to be the backup person, right? And the idea of someone who specializes in backup, that is the rarest bird of all. And I know of like a handful of other people that I've known over the years that would consider themselves backup specialists. And generally they all work for vendors. None of them work for, end user companies. And so what happens is you have this really important part of IT that is going completely ignored by so many people, or at best they give it to the junior person, and they don't know what they're doing, and they don't understand the importance of it. They don't understand the security aspects of it. And so, well, why don't we just do what we did with everything else, and let's just use SaaS, right? Let's do data protection as a service. And then all you have to do is you have a single login. All of the back end infrastructure, all of that just magically happens. All of the stuff that I spent my career helping people try to figure out how to do, that just magically happens in the back end. So there's no more change management. There's no more capacity management. There's no more security management. It's just, you have a login to a website. You know, if you're backing up a laptop, you put on an agent. If you're backing up VMware, you put in an OVA. If you're backing up a SaaS service, you authenticate to that SaaS service, and you just tell us how often you want to back it up, and then magic just happens, right? And so the idea of having backups that automatically grow with your environment, or automatically secure it against the worst things such as ransomware. There's no path to take. For the worst thing could happen in your world with ransomware, and there's no path for that ransomware to take to get to where our backups are, which are all stored in our account in AWS. We happen to run our technology in AWS. It's obviously encrypted in transit. It's encrypted, when it's stored. We have a number of protections. Obviously, we support MFA. We support immutability. We support, even that thing of if you accidentally delete your backups, we have a feature for that, where basically you can go, oh crap, I deleted something that I didn't want to delete. We have a period of time that allows you to go back and just essentially a recycle bin for your backups. So whether you do it accidentally or a black hat does it, you can get your backups back. And so it's just all of that really hard stuff just handled for you as a service. That idea just really appeals to me.
Yeah. So what about retention policies? I imagine there's a way that customers can set their own retention policies of how long you want to keep stuff. But how important is it for that customer to understand and, have a retention policy? Because I've worked for some bosses that said, oh, we want to retain everything for forever. And other people says, oh, there's a risk of doing that. We want to, avoid that risk. What is your take on that?
Well, our obviously we support different retention policies on different backups, and you can set whatever retention policy you want, including infinite, right? Mm-hmm. If that's what you want to do, we're here to take your money, right? But that's I don't happen to think that that's a good idea because of my ideas behind backups, right? Mm-hmm. My personal opinion is that you first off, make sure you understand what is backup, what is archive. There is some data that you maybe should or could store for a really long period of time. we have a less expensive cold storage option for that data. And make sure that you're able to search against that data via like a federated search, where you're not, you don't need to know the name of the server necessarily that the data came from, for example, to find something, because you're not going to know that 10 years from now. They do need to do that. They shouldn't treat all their data the same. They should have a tighter RTO and RPO. RTO and RPO should drive all your decisions, which is recovery time objective and recovery point objective. So recovery time objective is how quickly you need to restore the data. Recovery point objective is how tight that restore needs to be, meaning how much data you can lose. And both of those should be measured in time. And you should have an RTO and RPO for each of your parts of your environment. And then you should set those. RTO will determine just sort of how you back it up. RPO will determine how frequently you back it up. And so you need to, those are things I think that are more important necessarily, that like tackle those first. Mm-hmm. and then also start to figure out where can we dial retention back, so that we can save money, basically. Because what we charge for, it's a single price for is well, if we're talking laptops or mobile phones or SaaS, we charge you per seat, right? But if we're talking about backing up data centers and that sort of stuff, that data is all globally compressed and deduplicated, and we charge you for how much we're storing on your behalf in the back end. And so the more you store, the longer your retention is, the bigger your bill will get over time. And you can change your mind, by the way. You could say, oh, we didn't realize this was going to be so big. You can dial the retention back. That data gets deleted. Your bill goes down. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So how can people connect with you online and learn more about your podcast and Druva and the things that you're working on?
So I'm at WC Preston on Twitter. You can find my website at backupcentral.com. The podcast is Backup Central's Restore It All. It's available, wherever you do that. I also have a Druva podcast, which is called No Hardware Required. And Druva.com, Druva.com. By the way, we even have my book that you mentioned, Modern Data Protection. Druva sponsored it. And so you can actually get a complimentary copy of it by going to Druva.com/podcast. And awesome. You can download a free ebook copy of the book.
Awesome. And I'll link all that up in the show notes so people can get that at geekleader.com. And I really appreciate having you on the show and teaching us some of the things that we need to be paying attention to and understanding when it comes to backups, and clarifying some of the things that we hear a lot when it comes to immutability and archiving and RTO and RPOs. So thanks so much.
You hit all my favorite points. So I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also, don't forget to check out merch. We have some T-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also, don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.